a key contribution of the Austrians was that with the issue of socialism and the failure of socialism and communism, is that they specified that the issue is not that people are just not motivated. It's not an issue of motivation. Because in fact, socialist economies, they did offer people very strong incentives to work really hard. Because if you didn't work, you got sent to the gulag. So yeah, in America, yeah, if you work hard, you get rich. And obviously there's motivation to get rich. But I'd say the motivation to not get sent to the gulag is a lot bigger than the motivation to get rich, for most people at least. So likely they didn't really have that problem. And in fact, all of the discussion of Soviet economic failure, absenteeism isn't exactly a problem. People were turning up to work, and people who didn't turn up to work faced serious punishment. So there was an issue of there was no serious issue of motivation. The real issue there was that the managers of these publicly owned economic institutions could not perform economic calculation because they did not own the means of production. There was no market in the means of production. So if the state assigned you the cars that you rode or told you which trains to go to, and the state also operated the car factory, and the state also operated the train factory, and the state also operated the steel factory, so they are the entire supply chain and the consumer, and they are making the decision on your behalf. They have no mechanism of performing economic calculation, regardless of how motivated they are. So ultimately, the issue with the private property is not just something that we could instill into people if we just develop them into the proper socialist man, which is the really dangerous thing where socialism goes from. That's the phase where they go from hippies making stupid, laughable arguments to Stalin's putting people in gulags, because look, we're just going to make the best human possible, and you're clearly not it. So we don't want you as part of our society. So we're just going to put you in the gulag, and that's going to allow us to achieve utopia. So even if they did that, it didn't work, and it wouldn't work because there was no chance for performing economic calculation. So this, I really find it to be the most important contribution for the Austrians, because as an intellectual contribution, because upon it are built all of the important Austrian economic contributions in everything from money to the business cycle to also the state. And I think this is really the part of Austrian economics that people are the most unfamiliar with, because a lot of people are sympathetic to Austrian ideas. They get to learn about Bitcoin, they get to learn about the Austrian business cycle theory, and so they become interested and curious, but they continue to think, well, no, clearly Austrians are just being ridiculous libertarians on the issue of the state. You still need a government, you still need a police, because obviously the alternative is anarchy. The alternative is people going around smashing windows and burning things and burning tires. Small little aside here, these are the same people who tell you that smashing windows is good for the economy, so I'm not sure why they would be complaining. They tell you that this stuff is good for the economy because it raises GDP, but then they tell you that you can't have the anarchists because they're going to destroy everything. But of course, that's not true. The anarchists don't believe that destroying things is good. For me, the concept of anarchy is the concept of private property. So the extent to which the state exists is the extent to which it violates property rights, because the state is not a productive institution, because it does not receive its money voluntarily. It receives its money coercively. So nobody paid them for any of the bullshit that they're doing for you. And that's why they suck at it, because they don't own that stuff, so they don't know how to perform economic calculation. So it's, there's levels to the game of how far you get along with Austrian economics. And I think, if you come through the Bitcoin rabbit hole, the first mind-blowing thing from the Austrian perspective is the fact, hey, you actually don't need to be printing money all the time. Money can work, even if the supply is fixed, believe it or not. And then you start digging in, and you realize, oh, okay, that's because of the socialist calculation problem. Where else can we apply this thing? And then the entire world begins to fall into a big, giant papier-mâché installation of lies that just comes crumbling down with the searing truth of Austrian fire, and it it all falls apart. And for me, I think applying the frame of economic calculation to the question of security and defense is the key toward understanding the question of the state. And so that's what I do in the last three chapters of Principles of Economics. So we've established that. So then let's look at the issue of defense. So violence is something that people don't want to happen to them. So protection from violence is just another economic good. So just like you want apples or oranges or cars or laptops, you also want something that protects you from violence. So why would it be an economic good that is different from all the other goods? In fact, when we analyze how it is provided, we see the same hallmarks of everything that we see with every other good. When it is provided by a monopoly that can get its money from you without having to convince you willingly and consensually to give them your money, they're going to suck at it. And that's why private security people, you hear a lot fewer stories of private security people assaulting customers or people at malls or people at universities or people at all of these private locations that have private security than you do with police, because the police have very different incentives in their job. In fact, when you look into it as an industry, you see that we already have in the world today, we already have more private policemen than we have public policemen. So there are more private security personnel in the world than police and military. And it makes sense. If you look at a bank in any town, it's usually not the police that are guarding banks or jewelry stores. It's usually their own security. And it makes sense. Why should you as a citizen be paying your taxes to finance extra protection for the bank? The bank should provide its own security. And it's becoming more and more like that. More and more people are becoming reliant on private security. And private security is infinitely more efficient at doing its job than public security. And so there are many stories of just private security providers being able to provide the services at a much lower cost than police are able to do it. So we are heading in this direction. And so I would call myself an anarchist because I see the market for whatever it is the state provides. In some places the state provides money. Well, everywhere today the state provides money. In some places, and sometimes the state provided potatoes and you had famines. And in some places they provided all kinds of critical infrastructure which was failing. And in all over the world, whenever anything is provided freely and voluntarily on a market, you see that it continues to thrive and it gets bigger and better and cheaper over time, because people have to continuously improve to meet the demands of the consumers. So I think it's the same thing with defense and security. And you see it that more and more, you can see that governments are in the business of protecting governments rather than in the business of protecting people. And if you want to get protection, you need to get it yourself. I think you see this more and more, particularly like in the West, in Europe and in the US, security is almost entirely breaking down. And, well, I mean, not entirely breaking down, but still there's a lot of crime in a lot of these cities, which is a lot higher than it used to be, say, a century ago, I would imagine. So all of this, in my mind, suggests that defense and security are no different. Having said that, so that's what makes me an anarchist. Now, on the question of monarchy, I've become more and more sympathetic to the idea of monarchy thanks to the work of the Prince of Liechtenstein, the ruling Prince of Liechtenstein, Prince Hans Adam, who's written a great book called The State in the Third Millennium, which is a really interesting book. And you can pirate it from Library Genesis, as always, the most important website on the internet, libgen.rs. And they keep changing the domain name because they keep shutting down, but the pro tip here is to always look up their Wikipedia page, because the Wikipedia page has the updated domain name whenever they shut them down, so you can always find them.